This 79-year-old woman could no longer live in her cabin because her children decided to place her in a nursing home. So, she wanted to donate her simple home to a homeless man who had always helped her, but her children prevented it. When the homeless man managed to enter the cabin, what he found inside made his jaw drop. Since her husband's death, Mary had been living alone in a cabin in Texas. She had been able to take care of herself her whole life, but now it was becoming increasingly difficult. At 79 years old, she still tried to keep the place clean and well maintained, but her strength and health were no longer what they used to be. When the phone rang, it was her oldest son on the other end, once again insisting that it was time for her to agree to stay in a nursing home. There, she would have healthcare professionals to treat her, activities to pass the time, and other people to interact with. Mary listened to all the arguments and eventually decided that it was okay, she could live in a nursing home. But she wanted to know what they intended to do with her cabin and the small piece of land around it, a space that she had taken care of with great care for almost her entire life. Her oldest son suggested they could sell the place, and the money could be all Mary's. The youngest son suggested renovating and renting the place, generating a monthly income for the family. Mary listened carefully to the ideas again, but she was sure that she had a better solution: to donate the cabin just as it was to Johnny, a homeless man from the area. Johnny had always been a good man to Mary, and she wanted to help him in some way. Her children did not like the idea at all and did not trust Johnny, but out of consideration for Mary's age, they said they would see what was possible. What neither Johnny nor her family knew was that Mary would leave something much more valuable than the house itself in the cabin. Johnny had already turned 60 years old. He lost his wife a decade ago. As a result of this grief, he developed a depression that greatly disrupted his life. It was on the streets that Johnny and Mary met 3 years ago. Mary was coming back from the market, carrying several bags. Suddenly, one of the bags broke, and the fruits rolled onto the street. When Johnny noticed that it was an elderly woman, he hurried to pick up all the fruits and even got another bag for her from a nearby store. After that, Johnny asked for permission and took the rest of the bags that the woman was holding and said, "Leave it to me. I'll take everything to you." Johnny had no idea that that encounter would change his life forever. Since then, Johnny has been constantly helping Mary when she goes shopping or when the cabin needs minor repairs. Even with much insistence from the lady, Johnny never accepted any amount of money as payment. He noticed that the lady lived totally alone and without luxuries and was only extremely grateful whenever he received a piece of cake accompanied by coffee, made by the magic hands of Miss Mary, as he said himself. Over the years, the two lonely people became friends, and the elderly woman she even invited him for dinner at her house. They respected each other and Johnny listened attentively to all the lady's advice. Mary even noticed that his symptoms of depression had eased. For his part, Johnny felt useful when the lady needed his help in some way. On the day Johnny learned that Mary was going to a nursing home, his heart tightened. Mary said that for the past 2 years, her children had been calling her constantly, almost every day, insisting that she leave the cabin and the land, and she no longer had the strength to deal with this family pressure. As far as Mary was concerned, she would live until her last day in the cabin she built with Harry, her husband. "But in this life, not all of our desires can be fulfilled, right?" said the resigned lady. Johnny hugged his friend and replied that she could always count on him if she needed any help. He thanked her for everything she had done, giving him a chance to feel the taste of dignity and trust to try to get out of his situation on the street again. It didn't even take 2 weeks and Mary did go to the nursing home. The family made all the preparations without even consulting her. They wanted everything to be quick and uncomplicated, avoiding debates and confrontations of ideas with her. Johnny didn't even see Mary move. He only sensed that she must have already moved because he never saw her in town again. From time to time, he still went to the cabin just to make sure everything was in order, and on one of those rounds, Johnny was lucky to see Mary's children at the cabin. He approached and introduced himself. He asked about where his friend was, and the oldest son expelled him, saying that he wouldn't act like his mother, giving him money for booze or financing any other addiction that the dying man had. Johnny didn't expect this kind of rudeness from the children of such an educated lady as Mary and was silent for a second. Somewhat disoriented, he asked again where she was, but besides not answering, the children chased the man off the property, saying that it was better he didn't show up there anymore or they would call the police. Johnny was feeling bad, but he wasn't going to let that behavior keep him away from his friend. Since the children didn't say which nursing home Mary was in, he would find out on his own. He went to the city's homeless shelter and asked the caretaker if there was a list of nursing homes he could consult. In this way, he discovered that there were only 4 nursing homes. 2 of them in the center, 1 in a more remote neighborhood, and the 4th was even further away, on the outskirts of the city. But that didn't matter, he would walk as much as he needed to find Mary. He took a shower at the shelter and left early the next morning. The first 2 nursing homes were close to the shelter he was staying in, but Mary wasn't in them. He walked for another 40 minutes and arrived at the 3rd home. There was a Margaret, but she wasn't his Mary. Then Johnny walked for another hour until he reached the main road that would take him to the last nursing home on his list. Johnny kept walking, he hitchhiked the whole way, but no one stopped to help him. About 3 hours later, Johnny finally saw the nursing home and went towards it, already very tired and thirsty. He was no longer a young man, after all. Upon entering the place, he thought it was now or never. She had to be there. At the reception, he didn't even ask if there was a Margaret there. So Johnny asked to see her, claiming to be her brother. He had to lie because he knew that just being a friend wasn't enough for these companies to let him through. They warned him that the visiting hours were almost over, but he could see her quickly. So they took him to her room and he was speechless with what he saw. His friend was lying down and looked sick. He had never seen her so fragile. But when Mary saw that it was Johnny at the door, her eyes lit up and she opened a sincere smile. Johnny approached slowly, still analyzing Mary's situation, but the elderly woman was in a hurry. She signaled with her hands for him to come closer quickly and said, "Don't waste time. I have something to tell you." The man sat next to her and helped her sit up. She leaned towards him and whispered something in his ear that made Johnny shiver. "Is this serious?" "Is it serious?" he asked, totally disbelieving what he had heard. Mary patted his cheek, then squeezed his hand and said, "Yes, it is. It's yours. And everything inside it is for you too. Everything." After some time, a staff member of the nursing home warned that visiting hours were over and Johnny had to leave. He didn't know what to think about what Mary had said, but he was a little sad to see her in such a fragile state. She didn't seem like the same independent and determined elderly woman he knew. Maybe the change was very recent and she hadn't gotten used to it yet. Before leaving, he looked over his shoulder and saw Mary smiling. He still didn't know, but that was the last time he would see his friend. The next morning, Johnny gathered the last few coins he had and bought a simple flower arrangement. He walked the entire route back to the nursing home. Upon arriving there, he discovered that his friend had passed away that night. He wasn't prepared for that news and it took a while for it to sink in. He cried right there and the receptionist wanted to know if he hadn't been notified by his brother, as the family had already been notified during the night. The man didn't answer, he just walked away letting the tears wash his face. Johnny headed back to the cabin that was now his, according to Mary's last words. Despite this, he didn't seem happy. A copy of the key was hidden in the same place that Mary had said, so he had no problem getting in. He wanted to be happy with the gift, but he couldn't stop thinking about Mary. At that moment, it was just an empty house. He decided to prepare coffee, just the way Mary had prepared it for him before. He opened the highest cabinet in the kitchen and searched for where the coffee powder was. There was a cardboard box in front of the coffee, and when he tried to remove it, the box fell straight to the ground, making a considerable noise. When he picked it up, he noticed that it was a heavy box, and so he decided to open it to make sure he hadn't broken anything that belonged to his friend. Upon seeing what was in the box, Johnny was completely breathless. There were many bundles of money, an amount that the man had only seen in movie suitcases. He put everything on the table and stared at it for several minutes, thinking about what it meant. There were more than 40 bundles of $10,000 each, totaling almost $500,000. A fortune that Johnny deduced was a lifetime's worth of savings. He remembered that Mary had confirmed to him that the cabin was his and also everything that was inside it. Nevertheless, he hesitated, but in the end, he gathered all the bundles in an old, faded leather bag and went to the door. He knew exactly what to do. In the following days, Johnny made a modest renovation to the cabin, just enough to make it more attractive, without removing the original features made by Mary and her husband. He selected the personal items that the former resident had left and organized them in the environment as if it were a museum exhibition. On the living room wall, he hung a beautiful photo of Mary and left a lit candle just below it. Johnny wasn't doing this because of the property she left him or because of the money he found, but because he wanted to show how much he valued the friendship he had with that lady. It was a matter of days until Mary's 2 children arrived at the cabin and came face to face with Johnny inhabiting the place. They asked him what he thought he was doing there, and Johnny was honest. He said he had visited Mary at the nursing home before her death and that she had left the cabin and everything inside it to him. The children thought Johnny, besides being homeless, had mental problems. How could a property like that, which belonged to their parents, be given away to a homeless man they didn't even know? Johnny regretted that they didn't believe his story but said it was true and regretted even more that they were both Mary's children and had no idea what their mother's last wishes were. Upon hearing this, Mary's youngest son wanted to attack Johnny. He only didn't grab him by the collar because his older brother stopped him, saying that if he touched that man, they would lose their reason, and that could harm them legally later. Finally, he said he would resolve it in the most civilized way, by calling the police. And that's what he did. A police car with 2 officers arrived at the cabin in less than 20 minutes. Upon learning what was going on, the officers told Johnny that he would need to show some document proving that his version of the story was true. It could be a digital recording, a will, or a letter signed by Mary. Johnny had nothing but her word. In this case, the police said he would have to leave immediately. Mary's youngest son stepped forward and claimed that even if the homeless man left the residence, he had invaded the place, and that could not go unpunished. Therefore, he wanted to file a complaint and thus hoped to remove that man from circulation once and for all. Johnny was extremely hurt by all of this. Children who did not respect their own mother's wishes. He couldn't hold back the tears and just asked for a few moments to pack his personal belongings. Noticing that the cabin was indeed cleaner and in better condition, the older son granted the dying man a few minutes. Johnny then took his old blanket that was leaning on a chair and put it inside the old, faded leather suitcase, covering what was already inside. Before leaving, he took a look at the shrine he had prepared for his friend and surrendered to the authorities without causing any more trouble. He didn't want to give Mary's children any more ammunition or worsen his situation. Despite the situation being very unfavorable for him, Johnny wasn't stupid. He already had a good idea of what to do. Mary's children had no idea what would happen in the next few weeks. Mary's youngest son did not withdraw the charges, and upon arriving at the police station, Johnny only did not stay in prison because he had no criminal record but was instructed to quickly seek a public lawyer to represent him in the process. When he was released, Johnny went to the shelter where he spent his nights and spoke to the caretaker. He asked for a recommendation for a law office, and the only thing the caretaker did was point to an advertisement in the city service book. Mary's children wasted no time. They placed a restraining order against Johnny to prevent him from approaching the cabin and put it up for sale for $84,000. They didn't even bother to remove furniture, decorations, and personal items from inside. Selling the property was a priority. A week passed and a lawyer named Charles Winter contacted Mary's children. He said he was interested in the property and wanted to know if it was possible to use it as a vacation home. The children did not object to the idea, but said there were other interested buyers. So the property would go to whoever made the best offer. Charles wanted to know what the highest offer had been up to that point. The eldest son revealed that a potential buyer had offered $90,000, which would be paid in 3 different deposits. Charles was silent on the other end of the line for a moment, as if calculating or considering whether it was really worth entering that auction. When he spoke again to Mary's children, he said he offered $91,000 in cash, full payment, as long as the negotiation ended when they hung up the phone. The 2 children didn't even have to think about the offer. They accepted and scheduled the conclusion of the negotiation for 7 days from then, when they would exchange the money for the key to the property. The 2 children celebrated the sale and announced that they would use the time to discard all the junk that the former occupant of the cabin had left behind. Charles, however, said it wasn't necessary. That if their idea was to get rid of what was in the cabin, he was willing to pay $1,000 more to leave it as it was. Greedy, Mary's children then said the deal would be closed for $92,000 and that nothing would be removed from the place. 7 days after the phone negotiation, Mary's 2 children went to the cabin to conclude the sale of their parents' house. A luxury sedan parked with 2 occupants. A man in his 40s or 50s in a suit soon got out of the driver's seat. He introduced himself as lawyer Charles Winter. The occupant of the passenger seat remained in the vehicle. After greeting each other, Charles and Mary's children began the transaction. The lawyer opened the trunk and showed several bundles of money. Then he handed the trunk to the younger of the brothers. He checked the money and nodded positively to the older brother, who then handed over an envelope with documents and the key to the property. "Congratulations, Charles. This is your new vacation home," he said. But Charles extended his arm with his palm up and said, "Don't congratulate me, gentlemen. I'm not the true owner of this admirable cabin." Mary's children looked at each other surprised, not understanding what was happening. "I'm just the negotiator," Charles said. At that moment, the second occupant of the luxury sedan got out of the car. He also wore a suit, well-trimmed beard and hair, shiny and impeccable shoes. Mary's children have the impression that they know him from somewhere, but none of them are quite sure. When the man stands directly in front of them, Mary's children realize that it is Johnny, the homeless man. This is the man who is buying the property. All the money in the suitcase is his. Please conclude the delivery of the keys and documents to him, gentlemen. The children don't know what to do. They don't know if they should feel deceived or humiliated, but there was indeed money in the suitcase, and it was the agreed-upon amount. The eldest son sees no other alternative but to hand over the key and envelope, but he does so with a look of profound anger. Johnny accepts it, hands the envelope to Charles, and keeps the key. "You never knew Mary's true desires," he said. "You did everything to get me away from her and what was left of her, but she knew the children she had and left me the necessary conditions to ensure her will was done." Except for the lawyer, no one understood what was happening and how that homeless man had obtained that money. They hardly knew they were receiving a portion of their own mother's money. Now Johnny could legally stay in the cabin. "I'm going to live in this cabin and respect everything Mary and her father built. See you in court. Use this money to pay a good lawyer in the action you filed against me. You will need it," Johnny said. "Now get off my property or I'll have to call the police." With these words, Johnny left Mary's children behind and closed the door of the cabin behind him. He rekindled the candle below Mary's picture and had a peaceful and restorative sleep in his new home that night. If you enjoyed the story, please like, and the other video that is probably appearing on your screen will also likely touch your emotions. Have a good session and see you in the next video.